Welcome, you beautiful, lovely, gorgeous marvels. How are you doing? Dana and I are back for another episode. Hi, Dana.
Hi, Gwen. How are you doing?
I'm great, Dana. The weather where I live is warming up and the sunshine is out and
Nice.
it's lovely. It's lovely.
We're having wonderful Seattle weather, which is about 47 and rainy, but I love that.
Oh.
I love that weather.
You
Get
love
all
that weather?
snuggly. Yeah. Get under a blanket. I love it. Yeah.
I think as Californians, we're like, Mother Nature. Do you know that we live in Southern California? we can't handle this much rain. Like,
you guys aren't.
You might want to let up. Just give us a moment,
Yeah.
Exactly. But now it's like 70s, sunny, clear.
Nice.
It's just nice.
Yeah.
So it's a good day. It's a good day. Dana and I we're so thrilled whenever we hear from our audience, from you guys.
Mm-hmm.
And we had someone reach out to us, and it was a great question, which is differentiating between what autistic shutdowns look like for adults, and differentiating that and understanding that difference between that and maybe depression. When Dana and I were, talking about this before we started recording, adding an anxiety to that as well is a nice thing. But let's just start with meltdowns and shutdowns. Let's start there. We had just done an episode on tantrums, tantrums versus meltdowns. Yeah. And I think we were talking really about adults.
People may have thought we were only talking about kids.
We did refer to kids because I think when we talk about tantrums, people automatically think about little ones. When the reality is we see adult tantrums adult tantrums happen on TikTok and Twitter all the time. Yeah. Like you see them all the time.
Yeah. Whether you call them tantrums or meltdowns or I mean, that other video we go into detail about the difference between the two.
Yeah.
One for kind of secondary gain, the other one you can't control. It's funny you mentioned the social media, because I saw as we're talking about meltdowns, I saw someone videotaping a parrot who was trying to open the plastic lid to get into the little blueberry thing, and it wouldn't open right. And the parrot had a little meltdown. The parrot just it wouldn't open, it wouldn't stay open. And then you could just see the parrot go bam, 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 and get mad at this inanimate object. And I'm like, I so relate to that. Getting mad at an inanimate object for not behaving immediately. And I sort of think about that in terms of what I would call, time limited meltdowns. It's more like a frustration thing, right?
Yeah.
Versus a bigger meltdown is anxiety and sensory. We talked about that in that other episode.
Yeah. I almost imagine in a meltdown, in a big meltdown, all systems go offline.
Yeah. You're just overwhelmed and boom. Yeah. It just goes. It's like that anger guy Inside Out, when he just reaches out and it explodes. That's what it always reminds. It's like my head exploding is a meltdown.
Yeah. I mean, and in that episode, we were really talking about volitional, controlled, manipulative, right?
Which would be a tantrum. Yep.
Which would be a tantrum versus I have hit a point where I no longer function. It's not a choice. Some of my clients call it a whiteout. Whiteout conditions, static whiteout. I don't see anything. I don't even know. I will say it's where some of my adult clients can, 99% of the time they are gentle and sweet and lovely. And then we know when they're in this kind of meltdown, shutdown arena because they've lost it. Literally it's so uncharacteristic for them.
It's not typical for them. Yeah.
No. Sure. And that's definitely, some other ways that I think about this is when my highly, highly verbal adults have no words.
Oh, yeah. They just want to throw things. Yeah, I want to throw things.
I'm like, we have hit critical mass.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
right?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
one is controlled, one is not. I mean, that's oversimplified. But
Right.
and therefore you don't punish shutdowns and
Yeah.
meltdowns.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, Dana, you know what? There's a reason. There's a reason why autistic adults experience meltdowns and shutdowns.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, we started talking today about shutdown specifically because I think we've talked quite a bit about meltdowns,
Mm-hmm.
shutdowns, and I get a lot of questions about shutdowns versus depression.
Yep.
Shutdowns versus dissociating is another big
Yep.
one, right?
Yep.
And I think that shutdowns versus depression, we really wanted to kind of talk about. We had a listener ask us to
Mm-hmm.
delineate that, so we want to address that. And I think it's just a really good question because most people, neurotypical or not, can associate with feeling depressed, right? So then it becomes, how do you define that? So the DSM, to go to sort of diagnostic criteria, if we're going to get clinical about it, it has a very specific set of what it means to be depressed, like clinically depressed, diagnosably depressed. There's like it's not better accounted for by, like, if your mother just dies, of course you're depressed. You're supposed to be depressed. And that there's an expected period of time you'd expect that to last, right? And the DSM talks about you're feeling like overwhelmingly depressed more than not every day for more than 2 weeks in a row. For me, if I've got someone who has a really important loss, it's going to be longer than that.
Yep.
But it's like, it's understandable. What I'd say is like, well, if this thing happened, of course. Other depression, that we can see, we call it dysthymia, which is kind of this coming and going low level depression. That might be a little bit harder to keep to delineate out of that. For me, burnout might look a lot like depression. And I don't really know if those two things are different. I mean, when you're burned out, like autistic burnout, the cause might be different, but the symptoms are fairly similar: difficulty concentrating, difficulty sleeping. You don't care about things that you once cared about before. That's literally like what's written in the DSM.
Yeah.
But if we're talking about like this idea of someone being clinically depressed or depressed, whether it's according to DSM or not, I've had people tell me, and we were talking before we went on, that people will say, "Oh, it's that person's autism." Yeah, no. If you look at diagnostic criteria for autism, ADHD, any of those, depression isn't in there. You notice it's not in there, right? So it doesn't automatically mean you're depressed because you're autistic. Anxiety is another story. That kind of goes and parcel. But this idea of depression, it's a normal human emotion. We're all wired to be able to have that. But shutdown for me is more like, it could be after a meltdown. It could be after, having your candle burning too long. And there's just a sort of muted feeling. When I'm in shutdown, if someone says, "Do you feel depressed?" I might say, "Oh, yeah, kind of." I mean, I always share the example that was the most extreme version for me when I applied to this job I really, 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 really wanted, and then didn't even make an interview. And I was in this weird fugue for like 3 days. And my colleague did, who wasn't, I won't go off on that. My colleague got an interview. They didn't hire him either. But this feeling, it sort of felt like depression. I felt down. I felt despondent is more of the word that I would use than feeling depressed. It was sort of like this, well, there's nothing I can do about it. It's different than dissociation, because for me, I was present and in the moment, but disconnected from it. I liken it to like moving through Jello, like everything's just kind of slowed down. My fingers and lips feel puffy. I know it's a weird thing. I think about that song "Comfortably Numb" by Pink Floyd. I'm like, that's what it is. But it's this weird sort of physical feeling. And then it's almost like nothing can get in. I think it's almost like this protective, nothing more can upset you, because you're already like, it doesn't matter. Whatever happens, I don't really care. It's just sort of like this absolute letting go, shutting down, right? Depression is different. I mean, you do feel blue, you feel actively sad, You may have negative thinking, right? You may have a chemical piece to that, may be inherited or not. And then dissociation, you're really not connected. So yes, we all do a little version of that if we're driving home from work every day. Like you get into your driveway and you think, did I stop at all the red lights? It's like automatic pilot is a form of dissociating. You're not fully present. You're thinking about something else. But dissociation really is you're not in the moment and you're numb. So shutdown has a numbing to it, but you really are there. You see everything that's going around you. It's almost surreal. Whereas in dissociation, you're not. Things aren't surreal.
Yeah.
Everything's really muted and you're just connected and you're maybe not in your body. Whereas when I was in shutdown, I was this weird aware of my body. I'd never had shutdown to that degree. I'm like, what is happening to me? It was the weirdest feeling. And then in retrospect, after I got diagnosed, I'm like, oh yeah, duh, that was shutdown. Yeah. Depression and shutdown, you wouldn't expect a shutdown episode, if you will, to last more than a handful of days, maybe a week. Depression can be much longer than that, right? Depression could actually be lifelong if you have a set of cognitions that reinforce that. Everything you think is something negative. Or it can be understandable. When my wife lost her mother, she had this period of depression, and it's only been a couple of years now, and she'll still go in and out of that, which in my mind is still normal. That's one of the most significant losses you'll have, and you're going to be in and out of that for probably 3 to 5 years. You'd expect that, but not every day, most of the day, most of the time, right? So depression to me, but the point you were making earlier was don't just chalk it up to this other thing you have, right? For people to dismiss it and say, oh, they're depressed, oh, it's their autism. Or if it's something else, it's like even people like I work with folks that have chronic medical conditions. Maybe someone just gets diagnosed with Parkinson's and they're depressed, and people will say, oh, it's just the Parkinson's. No, that's a horribly depressing diagnosis to get. Of course you'd be depressed. So you may not be able to, talking to our audience here, be able to identify what is making you depressed. Like, was there an event? But it may be more like how you're viewing, like what set of specs you have on. And that's what therapy is useful for, is to kind of get you out of that mindset so that you can see things in a different way and put you in the driver's seat. To me, depression is like you're not in the driver's seat. It's like everything's low and not feeling good, and you're not in the driver's seat. I mean, that's what we call sort of vegetative depression. It really is that learned helplessness, like you're just giving up. You don't, because you haven't been able to affect any change, right?
Right.
That's very different than a shutdown, right?
Yeah, I mean, and when it gets clinical, like meaning like when it gets to this place where a diagnosis is warranted, right? So it's not just kind of like a response to an environmental situation that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
A lot of times I see depression and anxiety as one, intense, and something that is difficult to control, and that's what's distressing about it.
Sure. Yeah.
I see, both kind of like thought-based and body-based types of flags or triggers for both depression and anxiety that become intensive. I will say, and then that gets in the way of functioning, right? And that's when we really make that diagnosis, right? It gets in the way of my being able to work, my being able to be a mom, my being able to
leave the house,
get out of bed. Yeah, exactly. Right. Like leave the house. And so, I versus like shutdown, which I see, and Dana, I thought you described this so beautifully, especially kind of being in your own skin, as like, we actually need to rest.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like we need a rest and recovery. And I'm not saying that you don't need to rest and recover in depression or anxiety, because sometimes there are things that are happening in life that lead you to those places, and rest is part of it. And so sometimes, an intervention, usually we're like add. And it's like actually subtraction is not a bad kind of thought, to help this person balance, to kind of achieve a better balance in their life. But I definitely see depression and anxiety to be driven by kind of thoughts or body feelings that cannot necessarily be controlled that are really distressing for the
Oh,
person.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you bring up the idea of just what find my words.
Take your
um,
time, Dana. Take
yeah.
your time.
What I was thinking as you were talking is a lot of questions that I get, a lot of you probably too, is these ideas are not cut and dried separate from each other. I mean,
That's right.
there's anything we're talking about psychological, there's overlap. I'll get a lot of people ask me about autism pieces that have to do with kind of neurology and brain centers. And I'll say, yes, you're right on this one piece, but they do overlap. So that was always frustrating for me when I was learning some of this stuff. I'm like, wait, is it this or is it this? And it's like, well, sometimes the boundaries aren't so clear between those two. So it's a wonderful question. It's worth talking about what those things are so you can kind of find the edges of them, and then knowing
Mm-hmm.
sometimes they can overlap. So you could be
Yeah.
depressed and then have a big shutdown episode on top of it or
Yep.
alongside or whatever.
Yep.
And then
Yep.
that gets tricky, right? So
Yep.
how do you deal with that? Especially if you're doing it on your own and you don't have someone to help guide you through it.
Yep.
It's some of what we get trained to do. Okay, so geez, this person seems super depressed and they're in shutdown mode. But I know if I push them in shutdown mode, that's going to shut them down further. So we're going to just go to support right now. And sometimes for us too, it's a matter of trying something and seeing what the response is and saying, oh, okay, because we don't know it all either necessarily, right?
Yeah.
But what would be helpful for you to know if you're depressed or shut down? In that regard, it's nice to know, get a better idea of the difference between the two. Again, knowledge is power, awareness that we always come to. Anything that can kind of arm you in terms of feeling more efficacious. And by that, I mean, you're the one in control.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been able to tolerate a fair amount of sorrow and depression at times in my life when I knew I was in the driver's seat. It's horrible when you're not, right? And like
Mm-hmm.
you said, it's out of control. There's nothing I can do about it. That's where it really gets into that sense of major depression. When I work with folks that I'm pretty sure even have clinical major depressive diagnosis, I don't automatically go to, oh, we need to work on your thoughts or we need to medicate you. I actually, and part of this might be my Adlerian training, I go to look on what's going on in other areas of their life. What is going on that's reinforcing their not being able to be in the driver's seat? And oftentimes it's
Yeah.
relationships or family, or they're in a job they hate or whatever, they're not living their
Yeah.
lives the way they want to. And then, yeah, you deal with those other things too, but it's almost always a larger situation that you just have to try to get your hand on and figure out, what's going on there, right? And that's
Yeah.
maybe a more non-shaming model too, that is like, you're defective, your brain is depressed, knowing that there are
Yeah.
people that just have neurochemical depression. It's what it is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, we know it. We know there's a heavy biological or
Mm-hmm.
genetic load for it,
Mm-hmm.
right? We
Mm-hmm.
we know this. Research has
Yep.
demonstrated that for us.
Mm-hmm.
And we also know that both depression and anxiety are ways in which someone is coping
Yeah.
with their life.
Mm-hmm.
And it may not be the healthiest way to cope, but it
Yeah.
is what they have done. And
Yeah.
so, really understanding that, Dana, where it's like, let's look at some of the other factors here that are
Mm-hmm.
happening in your life, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
it makes sense to me if you are in your life and you experience your life in a very unsatisfactory kind of way, let's say, and
Mm-hmm.
it's over and over and over again, and you feel like you can't impact it, and maybe you've tried
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and you perceive that you've tried,
Yeah.
that is really, it makes a lot of sense that that might lead to depressive thinking,
Yeah,
right? I
for sure.
can't, I never can, it never works out for me, right? This kind of
Mhm,
thinking.
mhm, mhm.
I mean, I see depression and anxiety to be two sides of the same coin, in that a lot of times when my clients that have depression are in an episode come
Mhm.
out of it, they start to gain energy back. But now
Yeah.
the energy leads to feeling anxious about the future.
Right.
Because it's like,
Damn
right,
it!
right. Like, what if this happens again? What
Yeah.
if this happened. Right. And now, and so this kind of spiral is so challenging. And that's, kind of when I know, okay, inevitably, going to what does life look like?
Yeah.
Where is it feeling bad? What can we do? We inevitably get in, like I always get into, that's when I feel like someone's individual profile, their neurological profile is what we need to pay attention to.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
So can
narrative,
be,
right? Because that's also their story of how it fits in their puzzle, so to speak. Oh, I shouldn't have said puzzle. Yeah, I didn't mean it puzzle piece. I really meant it more like, oh crap, I'm back. Can you see me backpedaling? Oh my God, I used the P word. How it fits in their Tetris. Yeah, like yeah.
In their Tetris, in their matrix.
I like that better.
Oh my gosh. Some of the audience probably caught that and some of them probably didn't. Dana, I mean, what Dana's trying to disassociate from the puzzle,
from the whole autism,
from the puzzle analogy,
puzzle thing. Oh God. Yeah.
Oh man.
Just modeling imperfection, right? There you go.
Absolutely. And can you be autistic and depressed? Yes. Much like any other person who's not autistic can also be depressed.
That's right. Yeah. Oh my God, there's that thing. Yeah.
Oh my God, there's that thing. It reminded me too, and maybe this is too simplistic, Dana, but when we were talking about stimming and OCD, right?
Yeah.
And how it really is like this continuum.
Yeah.
Where, if stimming reductionistically is pleasurable and regulatory, and an OCD is distressing, right? I'm caught up in this kind of loop that I can't get out of.
That I can't
close the loop. I can't get out of, right?
Yeah.
Have we seen stimming cross the line into triggering OCD? Yes.
Right.
We have seen this overlap, right?
Yeah. Right.
Much like I see, if we've got repeated meltdowns and shutdowns, can that cross the line into depression?
Yes. Yes, exactly. Right.
Yes. Right. And so maybe here it's like, we kind of keep going back to, how do we understand the internal private world of somebody in order to meet them where they are?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Their
perspective, their current outlook, all that kind of stuff is really important. Yeah.
Yep. And
I live in a vacuum, right?
No, absolutely not. And that if you are neurodivergent, there's a high likelihood your sensory system is just wired differently. Like there is some different wiring in the sensory aspects of the way in which you're in the world, which I think then makes that person more vulnerable or impacted by their environment. And so I tend to go to environmental factors very, very quickly because, how do we understand what led to the meltdown in the first place? Yeah. And then why did it lead to a shutdown? Right?
Yeah.
Like,
as soon as
how did that happen?
You're in the driver's seat more, right? So you're really helping people figure out the matrix. What is your matrix? What contributes to that? Yeah. Absolutely.
The other thing that I really dislike and is when people think that all you need to do with a depressed person is to tell them to make up their minds to be happy.
Don't worry, be happy. Remember that song?
I'm not even kidding. It's like, just wake up and decide to be happy.
Yeah.
And you guys, this is why it's a disorder.
Yeah.
It's not controlled.
Yeah.
Like, it's really about alleviating the symptoms and to help you. I think it's to help build skills and a self-understanding and self-compassion so that if that episode were to happen again, it's shorter. It's not as intense.
Right.
How do we, and that's what you mean, Dana, by put you in the driver's seat. But I would never tell a client that comes to me with depression, I would never say to them, let's cure this thing. So it never happens again. I never say that.
Yeah.
Ever.
I'm thinking about there's a band I love called Mr. Wives, and one of them, well, two of them went through this they were married, they're in the same band, they're still friends, and the band didn't break up. Yay. But a lot of the music came out of it. And there was one song that was kind of the wallowing in the pain, which I think can be healthy. Like if you have a breakup like that, there's a line in that says, I've sunk to the bottom. The bottom's empty. The bottle's empty. I do like it down here. I don't want to leave. And I'm like, yeah. And then there's another song that says, um, writing music for her, it drives her crazy because it forces her. She says, music, it drives me crazy. It forces my eyes to take a look and see like what's going on. And then I do need to decide to be happy. But in the song's not just decide to be happy. It's like, you need to solve what's going on in front of you that is dragging you down so that you can then let yourself be happy. So, and that speaks to that piece that you're talking about. It's patronizing when you say to someone, oh, well, just get up in the morning and say, golly gee, and
make a decision.
I'm going to go out and it's not that easy because it's very pervasive, right? So Shutdown might be more episodic. It might not be, it's certainly pervasive when you're in it, but in terms of what's going on in the rest of your life, it isn't pervasive necessarily. Yeah. Depression's pervasive, right? It's in it articulates into everything. So so it's trickier to pull someone out of it. We're not talking 2 or 3 sessions. We're talking about, someone's been depressed for a really long time, challenging like core beliefs. And where did those come from? And who did you learn those from? And does that still fit for you? And do you want to decide to not be that way anymore? Let's have you do 2 or 3 things to see how it goes. And it really is like teaching someone to ride a bike that's never ridden a bike before. You can't do that really quick. Well, some people can take off right away, but that's not the norm, right?
That isn't the norm.
Lots of practice. Yeah.
Yeah. And heaven forbid there's complex trauma. As
there always is,
history,
right? If you're neurodivergent, you almost always can bank on the fact that you have complex trauma. Yeah.
Yep. So this is really challenging. This is such a good question. I mean, to the listener or the Marvel that brought this up. I mean, what a great topic to pull apart. I think for Dana and I'll say I go into like major sleuthing mode when this happens because I want to help this person understand how they're feeling first, how they understand, not how I want them to understand it. And that might mean that we might make some course corrections in narrative and self-talk. And then I think equally as important, what do I set up in my life?
Yeah.
So that I feel better more often. Yeah. It's easier to feel better more often, right?
Yeah.
But Shutdown, I see that Shutdown be like, I've been sensorily bombarded.
And
I'm wiped. I'm just done. Wiped. Yeah.
Exactly.
So now other people in your life might need education on how to understand the difference between those.
Right.
Both share the commonality that they're not easily controlled.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. My wife was so great we've learned since then, but that one really big episode before I even knew I was autistic, like day 2, she was just like, are you okay? Like she knew that the news was so horrible that I didn't get an interview, but she just was gently checking in. Like, do you need anything?
Yeah.
Are you okay? I know you're okay, but are you okay? That kind of, that's what you need. Right. And that's very different than if someone's depressed and needs your active help to pull out of it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Marvels, keep sending them in. We love hearing from you. We really do. Thank you so much. If you like our podcast and you feel so compelled, I would just encourage you to, like our video or leave a positive comment. If you're listening audio wise somewhere, that really, really does help Dana and I. And that's it. If you like that, then we ask you to do that. Anyway,
we will spread the word. We're trying to change the world. So spread the word.
We're trying to create a place where it's safe and comfortable to talk about some difficult things and to have a little fun along the way.
That's right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's right.
We'll see everyone in the next episode. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.